Subcommittee meeting will come to order. Secretary Bessent, welcome. I know that you've had an extremely long day, long travel. I appreciate your hard work on behalf of the United States and the toll that it takes on one. Just back from an overseas trip, having testified in the House of Representatives today, Ranking Member Reid and I both decided that we'd like to put our opening comments in for the record to spare you the time and exhaustion. And if you'd like to do the same, Secretary, we'd welcome that in. Okay, we will do that and proceed. I would like to start with the first round of questions, Mr. Secretary, and then I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Reid. Just one second here. I know you're really glad that we didn't go through all of our opening sentences. Mr. Secretary, the Senate is currently considering the Genius Act. You're familiar with that legislation that's designed to promote and regulate innovation in payment stablecoins. The bill aims to bring our payment system into the 21st century. Unlike slow and costly wire transfers, stablecoins enable direct peer-to-peer transactions that settle nearly instantaneously. The potential benefits are immense. These digital assets can remove friction in global payments. They can unlock working capital for more productive deployment and improve settlement and efficiency in financial markets. The adoption of these innovative digital assets is soaring, growing from around $45 billion in early 2020, around $4 billion in early 2020, to more than $200 billion today. If Congress can provide long-due regulatory clarity, this remarkable growth trajectory will only accelerate. So my first question, Secretary Bessent, my legislation requires that stablecoins be backed by cash or short-dated U.S. Treasuries. One investment bank estimates that the Genius Act would expand the stablecoin market from its current value of $240 billion to $2 trillion by the end of 2028, with most of the reserves likely to be held in U.S. Treasuries. What are the benefits of having a new and expansive source of demand for U.S. Treasuries in the years ahead?
Senator, thank you for your leadership on this important matter. As you know, the administration, led by President Trump, has made digital assets a priority, and making the U.S. the world leader in digital assets is essential for our goals. Your question is a very important one. In the history of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, there have been the numerous passages along the way where many people assumed that the U.S. dollar would lose reserve currency status, and there's always been a new mechanism that has cemented that. This administration is committed to keeping the reserve currency status and enhancing that, and I believe that stablecoin legislation backed by U.S. Treasuries, or T-bills, will create a market that will expand U.S. dollar usage via these stablecoins all around the world. And I think that $2 trillion is a very reasonable number, and I could see it greatly exceeding that.
You've previously spoken about the need to reverse some of the overregulation in capital standards, including a reduction in the supplementary leverage ratio. That ratio penalizes banks, or the level of it today penalizes banks by requiring them to hold excess capital against low-risk assets like treasuries and reserves. So my question, Secretary Bessent, is how soon could we see changes to the SLR ratio, and how could yields be affected by a more tailored approach to capital requirements for risk-free assets?
Well, Senator, risk assets are like cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. That some risk assets are riskier than others, and the problem with the SLR is it doesn't differentiate.
Yeah.
So we have been working via FSOC and the regulators, OCC, the FDIC, and the Fed, to coordinate a change in the supplementary leverage ratio for the purchase of treasuries. We don't know the exact magnitude in terms of how it might affect yields, but what we have seen in the past is that when this requirement was removed, it had a substantial effect. So we don't know the effect. We do know the direction of travel. We don't know the magnitude.
Got it. I do think that a tapering approach, I'm pleased to hear it, will have a very positive impact on the markets. Thank you for that. And I know this has been top of mind and front of mind for you, certainly in recent days. You've been playing an incredible role in negotiating terms of trade for our nation with other nations. You're just returned from a big trip in that regard. And to the extent you could comment in a public arena on what sort of update you might be able to give us on trade and tariffs, I think we'd be very interested to hear that.
Yes. So as I've said several times before, there are 18 important trading relationships. They constitute between 90 and 95% of our trade deficits also. So our largest trading partners, but definitionally are also some of the worst offenders in terms of trade deficits. We are finding that these trading partners have come to us many of them with robust proposals. Some have been a little slower to come, like the European Union, but have now shown better faith. The administration put a 90-day hold on the reciprocal tariffs and took everyone down to a global baseline of 10%. It is my belief that countries that are negotiating in good faith could be rolled forward. Our negotiations with the Chinese were extensive, deliberative, done with respect between the two countries, but also the understanding on my part that China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the world, and that at 30% of global manufacturing, this is not sustainable. So we are looking to insert fairness into our relationship with the Chinese, and that can be done via them exporting less to us, or it could be done with what I would, to paraphrase from Ray Dalio, a big, beautiful rebalancing, where President Trump would like to rebalance the U.S. more in favor of manufacturing. We're down to about 9% of the U.S. workforce is involved in manufacturing. The Chinese economy is imbalanced on the manufacturing side. They need to increase domestic consumption substantially. Yep. So if we could do that together, then the two largest economies in the world could get into better equilibrium that's fairer for the American people.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful response. Now I'd like to turn to my ranking member and partner, Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome home, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Reid, nice to meet you. I don't believe we've ever met.
Well, today's the beginning of a beautiful relationship. Didn't Humphrey Bogart say that?
We can quote Ray Dalio, big, beautiful.
Mr. Secretary, Treasury distributes about $5.4 trillion a year in payments, Social Security benefits, tax refunds, military salaries, and all these payment systems contain some of the most personal information of every American. And you have had in Treasury DOGE representatives who are reputed to have access to lots of information. And I've been asking questions, not just of you, but of other cabinet members about the extent of the information they have. Have your staff or any DOGE representatives in terms of the distribution of payments started to stop or block any payments?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, it turns out that in emails filed by the Treasury Department to court, your chief of staff emailed that, quote, Mr. Krause and his team needed access to the federal payment system so they could pause USAID payments and comply with Mr. Trump's January 20th executive order to halt foreign aid. Did that take place?
I believe that may have been before I arrived on January 28th. And I also believe, if that's the Washington Post story or the New York Times story, they were actually quite selective with the email that was leaked to them. And Senator, just to be clear, what I discovered on my arrival was that we process about 1.5 billion payments a year that sums to the total you mentioned. Approximately 1/3 of that do not have what is known as a TAS, Treasury Accounting Symbol, or we found that. Having a TAS is the only way to tie a payment back to an appropriation. So we have been working very hard to make sure that all 1.5 billion payments can be tied back to an appropriation. I think a good mental model for this is to think of what's called the Treasury General Account, the TGA, is the checking account for the U.S. government. And above that sits between 400 and 450 entities, whether it's the big departments, the agencies, the smaller entities, and they put in requests for payments. Treasury is just the paymaster. So in general, we do not try to stop payments if they are properly notified, authorized.
Well, you're right. The occurrence of this stoppage was January 24th, 4 days. But in fact, payment was stopped because of a political motivation. USAID was deemed to be an inappropriate agency in the government, and which begs the question, how could you stop someone, or could you stop someone that decided to stop payments to an individual organization for reasons that were not meritorious at all? Is that...
I'm not familiar with the litigation around that, but I can tell you since January 28th, none of that has happened, and that everyone, I think there's some conflation, and much of it's due to the media on what is a DOGE employee, what is a Treasury employee. Anyone who works in the Treasury building is a Treasury employee. So they may have come there at the suggestion of DOGE, but they are properly trained and compliant, just as any other Treasury employee would be.
Well, I think you've touched on an issue of conflation of different jobs. On February 3rd, you wrote in response to my letter that one of your colleagues, Tom Krause, started as a DOGE representative, but then was brought on as an expert/consultant. But then 2 days later, on February 5th, you installed him as the Fiscal Assistant Secretary, which is the top official charge of running the Bureau of Fiscal Services. At any time during his employment at Treasury, was he a member or an employee of another company?
He may have been, if he were an SGE, I think he's allowed to have outside employment.
Well, in fact, again, another transcript from a court case, he was he was the chief executive officer of Cloud Software Group, which presents interesting or potential conflicts of interest.
But Senator, I believe as an SGE that is permitted, to be seconded for a limited period of time with proper controls.
Is he still involved with cloud computing?
I believe he's left Treasury.
So let me just switch to another area of data. I'm very much concerned because of the DOGE penetration of the entire government. Again, the IRS has extraordinarily confidential, deeply personal taxpayer information, Social Security numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if compromised, this could threaten Americans' financial security, as well as even more sinister aspects. DOGE staff members have attempted to access the integrated data retrieval system at the IRS. Secretary, does DOGE staff have they ever had, or do they have access to the integrated data retrieval system?
Not to my knowledge, sir. And again, any information they would have had access to would have been via, and I'm new to this, but I'm going to throw a lot of acronyms at you. It would have been through an MOU between IRS and OMB. So we put the proper controls, prophylactics around any activities that they had in the building.
Are you confident that no information has been exported from the Treasury Department by DOGE personnel?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Have you investigated it to ensure us that that's absolutely correct?
Well, we have strict protocols around that, so there's no reason to believe that there was. Now, in the previous administration, a contractor went to jail and paid, I can't remember, either a $5,000 or $10,000 fine, is serving a stated 5-year term. We don't know the terms of his plea agreement for exporting, I believe, the files of, I don't know, it was 40, 50, 100 of the highest taxpayers in America, including President Trump.
Well, you know, one of the issues here is these are temporary. Their employees or employer status is kind of up in the air, particularly if they're not full-time employees. They work for other companies, et cetera, and they certainly have the technical talents to copy and exploit and expropriate any information they want.
Well, Senator, that's why we took this very seriously in terms of there was a push for them to come in the building. Our staff at Treasury and IRS was very mindful and diligent of everything you've said. So we were very mindful of having proper balances, protocols in place.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you for clarifying that for us, Mr. Secretary. I think that was very helpful to have that.
And Senator, myself just told me all the details there are in the litigation.
Yeah. Thank you very much again, Mr. Secretary, for illuminating us with that explanation. I'll turn to Senator Van Hollen, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. And I know you've just returned back from London, I believe, where you're engaged in the trade negotiations. And I've been trying to keep up with reports as to where those stand. I just have one question regarding that, and that's a headline here that reads that Trump eyeing easing U.S. chip export restrictions to secure Chinese rare earths. I think all of us recognize the vulnerability the United States has with respect to rare earths. It's something that China has decided to limit much more since this trade war got launched in the most recent iteration. But many of us have been very concerned about the diffusion of very high-end chip technology and AI technology to China. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Yes, sir. To the Senator Van Hollen, to the extent that article makes it seem as though there is some quid pro quo, there is not. We have done an extensive analysis within Treasury, Commerce, and all the technology, the White House Office of Science and Technology, on any technology transfer, and we have been very judicious in that. So there is no quid pro quo in terms of chips for rare earths.
Okay, I'm listening carefully, and I understand you're saying there's no quid pro quo. I take it to mean from that there's, you're not saying that we won't increase the access to China of our highest end chip technology. I'm not saying you're saying we are. I'm just asking you haven't ruled that out. Am I interpreting you right?
What I'm saying, there's no intent. You're You're referring to NVIDIA chips mostly?
I'm referring to NVIDIA chips and the other high-end chips and the manufacturing equipment to produce those chips.
Yes, but in fact, we have done just the opposite. We put export controls on the NVIDIA H20, which I would regard as a very upper-end chip, but not the highest-end chip. So if anything, we have set a...
No, I appreciate the measures some have taken. I would argue building, in some cases, on the Biden administration, but this is why this caught my eye. I just returned from the Senate floor where I have been raising very deep concerns about the deal that was done with the UAE, where on the day before the president left on his trip, rolled back the safeguards that had been put in place by the previous administration, which with, I should add, strong bipartisan support, including the bipartisan joint committee in the House looking into China. So this is an area I think many of us are very concerned about, which is why this headline caught my eye. If I could turn to the cuts to the IRS, and I've followed your comments about how you're able to continue to bring in revenues despite the changes that have been made. I would suggest, Mr. Secretary, that it's way too early to tell. First of all, as you know, a lot of people were fired as probationary employees only to have to be brought back on an emergency basis for tax filing season. So I think it's important we understand that. And the idea that people can really turn around a ship and implement all these new technology and AI changes to expedite IRS collections, especially from very wealthy people, is something many of us have been pushing for many years. But the notion that this has happened in a very short time, I think, defies logic. So are you predicting that the changes that you've made this year will not result in the IRS collecting less revenue, especially from higher-end individuals than would be predicted this year? Obviously, if the economy continues to grow, revenues grow. But I'm saying I'm sure you've seen the CBO projections. The CBO says when you make these cuts, you will bring in less revenue from very wealthy people than you otherwise would. Do you agree with that analysis?
I don't, because I could tell you a couple of things. In discussing with my personal tax advisors, that they say that anyone you could bring in with 2 to 3 years of training is virtually worthless. I would say it is like putting me on a basketball court with Steph Curry. We have, from a whistleblower in Atlanta, and this was before I arrived, under Secretary Yellen, there was a problem with the rapid pace of hiring to the quality of individuals hired. If there were two criteria, two high criteria, many only satisfied one, and then there were a few examples of people who were not qualified at all.
I appreciate that. I would just emphasize again, it'd be helpful if your team could get back to me and members of the committee as to what specific assumptions, premises, and conclusions in the CBO report you disagree with. Can you provide us with that?
Yes, sir.
Because I'd like to, the CBO is like our umpire here. They really don't wear a party hat. They call it as they see it. And in this case, we're seeing very different projections that have very meaningful consequences for our deficit. So I'd appreciate that.
Yep, and what I would point out, in our technology innovation, the IRS technology stack update began in 1990. I believe $50 billion has been spent. We were due to spend $3.5 billion this year. We have cut that back because so much of it is wasted, or it's just patches on existing systems. And also, as I've said repeatedly, I have 3 goals: collections, privacy, and customer service. And I believe we can enhance all of those, as you clearly are well-versed in AI, And I think that we are at the dawn of being able to greatly increase individual and experienced auditor productivity via AI. So for the upper end tax collector auditors that you brought up, that is what would be considered a plum job. It is something that takes many years of experience. So our goal is to actually be able to enhance their productivity and collections ability with AI.
Thank you. I look forward to getting the analysis that looks at what the CBO has done and where you disagree. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Hagerty, Ranking Member Reed. Secretary Bessent, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Senator, nice to see you.
Chairman Hagerty, I'm impressed at your streamlining this hearing. It was striking. And I'm glad we're able to get right into the meat of the conversation. We are today spending more on the interest on our national debt than we are on our national defense. And I applaud your stated support for reducing the federal deficit and trying to get a handle on our national debt, but I struggle to square that with your support for tax policies that will, under CBO's analysis, add at least $2.4 trillion to our debt in the next decade. And given that credit rating agencies have just downgraded U.S. debt, I am concerned that by continuing to pile debt onto our national balance sheet, we will undermine growth, we will damage our ability to borrow, and we will lay the foundation for the next fiscal crisis. Do you share any of those concerns, and how do you see us making progress in improving our overall fiscal balance sheet?
Senator, I don't think you and I met in person. I think we had a long...
We have met, yeah.
Yeah, we did meet, and we also had a very long phone conversation,
yes.
I remember. The reason I'm sitting here today is because I became very concerned about our government's finances, and that in the trailing year, we will have had the highest deficit to GDP when we were not at war and not
yes.
in a recession.
Right.
And so this is what we have inherited. If we look at the CBO scoring, and I'm not making a judgment on the good people who work at CBO, I'm making a judgment on their models. The models assume a static 1.7 or 1.8% growth, right. whether we pass the one big beautiful bill or it fails. No matter what, we always grow at 1.8%. I believe through higher growth and the cost cutting that we are doing, that we can bring that under control. And I would note that if we want to use CBO scoring, CBO scoring, which I don't agree with, is at $2.4 trillion over the 10-year window. The CBO also scores the president's tariffs at $2.8 trillion. So that would be a surplus of $400 billion.
Let me move on to some more focused questions on specific things in your agency. I would welcome a chance about the broader economic picture, because I frankly don't believe the tariff income assessment. I do believe the tax, but we can debate. We literally could debate this longer than I believe I have.
But
let's move to sanctions.
If we want to agree on CBO, we have
yep.
to agree on CBO.
And I'll take that point.
Good.
Secretary Rubio testified recently the Trump administration has not lifted any sanctions against Russia. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge.
And sanctions, which I've long followed, I've served on this subcommittee for many years. It's not a static game. For every company that's sanctioned, typically they then move to set up a front company, to find another avenue. And with the Russians in particular, they're quite skilled at sanctions evasion by setting up new companies in other countries, including in the PRC. And for every sector that's sanctioned, there's a whole cottage industry devoted to evading them. Effective sanctions depend on follow-up, enforcement, and pursuit, which is why you have a whole talented team at Treasury focused on finding evaders and front companies, redesignating them publicly, closing the loopholes. Treasury and state were rolling out new sanctions designations every few weeks, much of last year. How many new Russian entities have you designated under your sanctions authority since January?
I will get back to you with that number.
The answer is 0.
Yep.
How many entities worldwide have you sanctioned for doing business with Russian companies in ways that undermine our sanctions and export controls?
I will get back to you with that number.
I believe the answer is 0. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love it if you'd get back to me and tell me I'm wrong. But the PRC is helping Russia's defense industry by providing dual-use components and advanced technologies. Last week, Chancellor Merz briefed a bipartisan group of us on Russia's alarming rearmament with help from China, Iran, and North Korea. How many Chinese firms have been designated for doing work directly with Russia's defense industry?
I will get back to you on that. I will tell you that we have sanctioned numerous Chinese companies for receiving Iranian oil, and we have been working on the shadow fleets are not independent.
Yes.
And I believe in what you said, the Russians and the Iranians are very good at evading sanctions with these so-called shadow fleets. So we are working on we have been pushing on those. We have sanctioned what are called teapot refineries in China. So these are non-state-owned, privately owned refineries. This is a new innovative measure that we have done. We have chosen not to go after Chinese government-owned. We are also working on tracking down the owners of these refineries, whether they have any assets in the U.S., in Western Europe, and moving on those very
I look forward to
aggressively.
talking to you further about sanctions enforcement. 2 last questions, Mr. Chairman. Since I'm the only senator remaining, I will make them brief. IMF, I just met with the head of the IMF. The IMF is a sound investment in global financial stability. We receive billions in interest every year from them on credit that they extend. In 2023, members agreed to increase quota, the capital contributions to the fund. It's my understanding that the Treasury Department and the White House have shown support for a measure to increase quota. Can you just confirm it is, in fact, administration priority to increase our IMF quota?
Yes. So across the multilateral
Yes.
the development banks, we believe that it is a very good way of leveraging tax dollars for U.S. power. And the managing director would have told you, or you may have seen that I gave a speech about 8 weeks ago during IMF World Bank Week.
She did.
That we are going to go back to basics, and we believe that they should be helping developing countries when they have a sudden stop and with development issues. Same for World Bank.
I would love to work with you, Mr. Secretary, on making sure that the authorization for that increase actually happens this year so that we can move forward in our partnership. The Direct File program allows Americans with very simple tax returns to file their taxes for free. It's been a great success. According to IRS research, 94% of Direct File users rate their experience as excellent or above average. For a government tool for paying taxes, that's pretty darn good. You've expressed support for streamlining IRS operations, and Direct File seems to support that mission. Do you continue to support Direct File, or should I be concerned about rumors that the administration plans to end it?
We are looking at Direct File. We wanted to wait until we got beyond the window of tax filing season, so we are doing an assessment of that now. I will get back to you on that. One of the goals is to have more electronic filing because I'm cupping the numbers, but in order of magnitude, an electronic filer who doesn't get a refund may cost us under $1.
Yep.
A paper filer who does get maybe up to $80. So I will get back to you on that.
Thank you, because I do think it's a successful program and reduces costs and makes it easier for taxpayers. Thank you for your forbearance, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you, Secretary Bessent, for appearing before our subcommittee today. We appreciate your time and your attention, your hard work, and being here with, I'm sure, extensive jet lag and testifying all day. So thank you again for being here. Senator Reid and I know will be submitting some additional questions for the record. Our effort is to get you back where you get a little bit of rest now, and we need you at your best, and I'm sure you are. And our members, I'll remind you, have a week to submit questions for the record. Mr. Secretary, we'd appreciate it if the department could respond to the questions that you receive for the record as soon as possible. And with that, the subcommittee meeting is adjourned.
I